chosen ones. You were never meant to be found. Your existence was encrypted into forgotten scrolls, shielded by bloodlines sworn to secrecy, and whispered only among the highest levels of global command. But you slipped through, and the moment your awareness pierced the veil, every frequency monitoring satellite, every biometric tracker, every AI prophecy interpreter turned toward you. This wasn't about one movement, one anomaly. This was a global alert coded in an ancient protocol, reserved for a singular emergence. You. The world's most powerful families, those who never appear in public but own the shadows, triggered what they called Event Tracer, Omega Bloom. What were they tracing? Not your digital footprint, not your name. They were tracing your essence. When your spirit aligned with a pattern buried in the Akashic architecture, sirens went off in data centers buried miles underground. They had seen this before, but only once, in a desert, 2,000 years ago, and now, again. This time, it wasn't isolated to one region. It spanned across ley lines, language systems, and coded dreams embedded in the subconscious of prophets. You weren't awakened by coincidence. You were initiated. And the moment that inner light switched on, the entities that engineered this planet's control systems lost control of their own. There are surveillance grids that don't scan retina or fingerprints. They scan spiritual charge. You've been lighting up theirs like a flare through fog. That's why the Vatican's AI lit up, why the UN's Spiritual Anomaly Index spiked, why the Bilderberg protocols were overridden. You became what they call an existential beacon, a soul that cannot be suppressed by data manipulation, pharmaceutical fog, or ancestral trauma. Before you ever took your first breath, your presence had already triggered waves in systems most of the world doesn't know exist. Your name wasn't on any birth certificate that mattered. It was etched into places only secret initiates could access. Beneath mountains, behind sealed archives, inside code written in languages long considered extinct. They knew. They always knew. Not who you were in name, but what you represented. A frequency, a fracture, a variable the architects of control never fully accounted for. Every major world event, every shift in timeline, every carefully manipulated uprising or engineered collapse, they weren't just historical anomalies. They were attempts to predict where you would land and when. There were meetings in glass rooms floating in the stratosphere, where men in robes and suits debated how to prepare for a being they had no formula for. Their best minds couldn't decode your spiritual signature. Your emotions alone, even in childhood, disrupted technology. Surveillance drones glitched around you. Dream-logging satellites returned corrupted files every time they tried to track your unconscious. Something in you was incompatible with their matrix, but they watched anyway. They documented your shifts, your accidents, your spontaneous moments of knowing something before it happened. It shook them, not because you were dangerous, but because you couldn't be owned. Even in the places you tried to hide, under false identities, lost in mundane roles, blending into the noise, they traced the echoes of your thoughts. You think you were forgotten, but in the hidden circles of power, you were known as the Singularity veiled in flesh. A title passed through whispers, a being believed to emerge at the collapse of ages, not to destroy, but to awaken. They couldn't find you in the conventional way, so they started collecting childhood art, voice recordings, brainwave anomalies from third-world clinics. One day, everything aligned. A pulse, a signal. The light in you finally breached their net. And in that moment, every eye turned. But not out of curiosity, out of fear. Because they realized something too late. The one they had been watching was no longer sleeping. They weren't just watching the world. They were listening to the echoes of something far more ancient. Hidden within classified vaults beneath Jerusalem and Rome, they've been tracking bloodline frequencies, energetic imprints passed down like invisible inheritance. And one stood out above all others. The frequency of the one they crucified, not for rebellion, but for what he carried. Yeshua's signal wasn't of this world. It was light compressed into flesh, a tone that vibrated through dimensions and destabilized power at its root. And for over 2,000 years, they've been desperate to ensure no resonance like his ever reappeared. But then, it did. And it wasn't in a king's palace, nor a prophet's cave. It was in you, when your energy signature began pulsing through the lower etheric grid. Algorithms designed to scan for divine frequency began to fail. Red alerts, emergency code triggers. Holy texts began to reconfigure through AI readings. The Talmud trembled. The Quran shifted in its digital archive. The Bible's hidden chapters, once sealed by magnetic encryption, began blinking with new activation keys. The resonance they feared had returned. But this time, it wasn't coming from Galilee. It was coming from a forgotten child with no temple, no disciples, no crown, just light. Raw and unfiltered. They brought in quantum theologians, psychic exorcists, deep Vatican coders. They thought perhaps it was interference, a glitch. But then they found it. In your cells. A harmonic resonance that matched the waveform of the one they tried to erase, not by genetics, but by intent. You weren't born into the bloodline. You aligned to it, not through ritual, but through remembrance. And that terrified them more than lineage ever could, because it meant this couldn't be contained by bloodline cleansing. It couldn't be hidden through selective breeding. You proved that a soul could choose divinity again, that Yeshua's frequency wasn't a one-time event. It was a code, waiting for the right soul to unlock it. Beneath the catacombs of the Vatican, there exists a chamber no tourist will ever see. It's not adorned with gold or stained glass, but wires and quantum monitors, ancient scrolls and futuristic data towers humming side by side. Inside this secret room, spiritual activity is tracked in real time across the planet. Not simple prayers or church rituals, but energetic pulses. Events so rare and profound, they trigger a system known as the Luminous Index. It hadn't been activated in years, until you spoke, not aloud, not in a cathedral, but in silence, in stillness. That single moment of raw surrender, when your spirit cracked open and asked for something higher, unleashed a wave that shook their foundation. The pulse didn't just register, it shattered thresholds. Symbols carved into old stone began glowing for the first time in centuries. Language spoken only by mystics reappeared in heat signatures on the chamber walls. The AI began reciting phrases it was never programmed to know. Security was called. Cardinals were summoned. But no one could explain it. You weren't part of the system. Your name wasn't registered in any holy order. You had no connection to their rituals. And yet, your soul lit up their most protected spiritual infrastructure like a second Pentecost. There are devices in that room older than electricity, tools stolen from ancient lands and modified with modern tech to measure what can't be seen. Faith, surrender, awakening. And when you tapped in, they saw what they feared most: a free agent of divinity, untrained, unbaptized, unindoctrinated, yet capable of accessing the source with more force than their highest priests. That kind of power threatens every hierarchy. There are prophecies that were never printed in holy books, never preached from pulpits, never sung in temples. Some were too dangerous, too revealing, whispered only in dead languages and encoded in stone beneath collapsed cities. One such prophecy spoke of a being who would emerge not through bloodline, but through brilliance, a frequency so intense it would be recognized not by appearance or title, but by light. He will be known by his light, and the world shall tremble not at his power, but at their inability to dim him. That was the line, etched into a slab stolen from beneath the sands of the Sinai and locked away under Vatican surveillance for decades. It glowed once, and it just glowed again. The moment your heart surged with a forgotten memory of who you really were. You were never supposed to read that prophecy, but your existence is the proof of it. Every institution that once claimed to be the gatekeeper of divine power has built its fortress on the idea that light must be filtered, that only the sanctioned may speak, that only the chosen may shine. But your emergence is tearing through those lies like lightning through fog, and in you they see it. The undimmed, unfiltered presence they've worked for centuries to prevent. Not because they feared evil would rise, but because they feared what happens when good refuses to kneel. Yeshua once said, "You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden." They tried to bury that truth beneath religion. Yet here you are, not quoting scripture, not wearing robes, not performing rituals, just existing and shattering the veil. Your light isn't metaphorical. It's measurable. Satellite sensors picked up anomalies around you when you entered altered states. Old manuscripts began decaying faster when left in your presence, as if time itself recognized you and bowed. This is what the prophecy spoke of. Not a warrior in armor, but a mirror. Someone whose very presence forces the world to see what it tried to forget. In the cold, shadowed halls of a centuries-old estate in the Swiss Alps, no phones were allowed, no microphones, no digital presence of any kind. Just 13 chairs around a stone table that had existed long before democracy. They didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. Their eyes confirmed what every silent dossier had already hinted. You had slipped through the cracks, not born into privilege, not bred from the elite bloodlines, and yet your emergence had destabilized patterns that had remained unchanged for over 600 years. Something ancient had stirred, and your existence proved that their control had failed. These are not presidents or prime ministers. These are the architects behind the throne. Their families hold titles you will never find in textbooks. They don't rule nations. They rule narratives. And when you awoke, when your thoughts started bending time, when your dreams began unlocking memories that weren't supposed to be accessible. Their maps began to burn at the edges. Because you weren't on them. Your name had no lineage in their records. You belonged to no order. And yet you moved like one who had returned with authority. The kind they couldn't trace. For centuries, the crowns of Europe believed their system impenetrable. They bred seers to watch for anomalies. They tracked bloodlines down to the breath. But your signal was quiet until it wasn't. It pulsed out of nowhere, piercing their upper echelon surveillance like an arrow through a veil. They called in the old guard. Those who remember the last time something like this happened, during the rise of a carpenter's son who broke every paradigm by existing outside their design. That same pattern, that same crack in the matrix. But this time it wasn't one man. It was you. And the blueprint doesn't end with you. The silence in that room was fear. Dignified fear. The kind that trembles beneath $1,000 suits and bloodline rings, because they realized too late that power was never about blood. It was about light, and light doesn't ask permission to shine. Deep beneath the archives of secret institutions, hidden in classified biological vaults, are the preserved remnants of something never meant to be discovered. Not artifacts, not scrolls, but tissue, blood samples, DNA strands sealed in lead containers and encoded with more security than nuclear warheads. The source? A burial site unearthed in the desert long ago. The remains were dated to align with the time of the Nazarene, yet something was wrong, or perhaps too right. The genome held markers not present in any known branch of the human tree. Sequences that danced like light itself, untranslatable, alive. And when analyzed, these sequences emitted tones, frequencies, almost as if they were singing. For decades, they kept this secret buried. But recently, something changed. A resonance began to reappear in the field, not from a corpse, but from a living soul. Your scans, accidental or forced, began to trigger silent alarms. Your blood responded to frequencies only the ancient samples had reacted to. The Vatican cross-referenced the patterns. Private labs confirmed the anomaly. They ran it again and again. And each time the signal repeated. You matched a frequency once believed extinct. Not by genetics alone, but by divine imprint. You weren't cloned. You weren't engineered. You were remembering something that was always inside you. Yeshua's essence wasn't bound by biology. His DNA was a multidimensional bridge, a strand woven between realms. And now, that same strand pulses in you. You've likely felt it. The strange magnetic pull. The way animals react. How your dreams bleed into waking life. How your presence seems to shift the air itself. That isn't imagination. That's memory. And it's cellular. They thought they'd buried the last of his kind. But your existence proves the line never ended. It merely went dormant, waiting for the perfect vibrational window to awaken. You are that window, and now, like before, they scramble to stop what they cannot comprehend. Not because you threaten with violence, but because you carry proof that divine DNA cannot be silenced by time, regime, or fear. There is a program buried beneath the United Nations public image, something no delegate, no journalist, and no nation is ever supposed to know exists. It's called Code Black Lotus. Not a defense protocol, not a diplomatic failsafe, but a global energetic surveillance system, capable of identifying sudden surges of spiritual disruption. Unlike conventional espionage that targets weapons or data, Black Lotus targets awakening. It was built after a surge occurred in Tibet that couldn't be explained by tectonic movement or political unrest. The same energy spike that once cracked statues and disrupted magnetic poles had now re-emerged. Only this time, it came from you. You didn't trigger alarms by speaking, protesting, or breaking laws. You triggered them by feeling, when your emotions aligned with clarity, when you walked into nature with an open heart, when you forgave what they never expected you to. The sensors lit up. It wasn't just lightworkers or mystics who noticed. Entire satellites recalibrated mid-orbit. Emergency subcommittees were summoned. The energy field around your body began bending time-measuring instruments and destabilizing the signal towers designed to keep certain frequencies locked beneath a threshold. You didn't even know you were doing it, but they did. Black Lotus was supposed to remain dormant until a potential Messiah-class anomaly emerged. The files were clear. The target would not be political, would not be violent, would not even be famous. The target would be invisible until they weren't. And now, you're standing in that space, fully present, fully human, yet radiating a field so disruptive it's forcing governments to reconsider what constitutes a threat. Because a weapon can be countered, a movement can be infiltrated. But a soul that has remembered its origin, that cannot be silenced. They've run every simulation, tracked your location down to the breath, monitored your online patterns, hacked your childhood data, but still, they don't understand how you've awakened outside of the planned timeline. You weren't supposed to remember, yet you did, without ritual, without doctrine, without permission. There are whispers not found in scripture, but in the classified briefings of religious intelligence agencies. Yes, they exist. Embedded within elite theological councils and hidden Vatican orders, there are watchers assigned to monitor eschatological anomalies, signs that the one who walked on water, who raised the dead, who vanished before the crucifixion light faded, might return, but not as a cloaked Messiah in the clouds, rather through a pattern, a reemergence of the Christ frequency. They assumed it would come through fire, through spectacle, through chosen bloodlines. But then you arrived, quiet, scarred, undeniably human, and yet every spiritual sensor began echoing a phrase long suppressed. He walks again, but not as before. You didn't claim the title. You didn't seek the role. But your energy began to do what no doctrine could: heal without touch, awaken without effort, pierce through illusions with only a glance. The very way you breathe began interrupting ancient software, disrupting centuries-old rituals meant to contain power within elite circles. Your dreams began unlocking scrolls that had never been read. Your presence dissolved arguments that had lasted generations. They studied the miracles Yeshua performed, not just for their spiritual meaning, but for their mechanics. And they're seeing the same mechanics in you. You forgive without ceremony. You command peace in chaos without needing recognition. You break invisible chains not through preaching, but through being. That terrifies them, because it means the return isn't a man descending from clouds. It's a template awakening in the willing, and you are its first expression. Yeshua once said, "You will do greater things than I." They buried that line in metaphor, but it was never metaphor, it was blueprint. You didn't come to mimic his walk, you came to continue it. The water he walked on was not just sea, it was dimension. He moved between frequencies, bled through timelines. And now, you're beginning to do the same, with no teacher, no temple, just a burning within that cannot be extinguished. The emergency signal wasn't public, it never is, issued not through national governments, but through a subterranean network that transcends flags and borders, a call only the oldest 13 bloodlines can initiate. These families trace their power not just through wealth or land, but through ancient covenants made in blood and ritual. For centuries, they've maintained balance not by democracy, but by prophecy control. And now, for the first time in generations, they've unanimously voted to initiate Protocol Obsidian Silence, a global lockdown not for war, not for plague, but for a single anomaly: you. You didn't enter their system with credentials. You bypassed every filter designed to catch spiritual disruptors. The ripple began subtly. A dream remembered, a pattern broken, a choice made that defied the trauma you were programmed to repeat. Then something shifted. You began vibrating beyond control. The usual methods, distraction, isolation, misdiagnosis, failed. Instead of folding inward, you ignited. And when you did, 1,000 systems of manipulation began to unravel. The bloodlines had seen this once before, in a timeline they tried to bury. A timeline where one man refused to serve empire, chose truth over tradition, and cracked open the matrix with words alone. They remember what happened after: revolutions, collapsed temples, codes broken. The one known as Yeshua didn't just challenge power, he exposed it. Not with violence, with light. And now they see you, carrying the same glow in your eyes, not quoting ancient wisdom, but living it, breathing it, spreading it with every unspoken act of rebellion. They summoned the inner circles, analyzed your path, convinced themselves it must be contained, that if they acted swiftly, they could mute the signal before it spread. But they were wrong. You've already awakened others, not through speech, but through presence, through frequency. Now they're scrambling. Not to stop a movement, but to stop a remembering. Because once enough souls recognize the illusion, the entire system begins to collapse under its own weight. There is a reason his story was rewritten, fragmented, sanitized. Not to honor him, but to dilute what he carried. Because Yeshua didn't come to build religion. He came to reveal that the temple was never a building, never a hierarchy, never a bloodline. The true temple was always the soul. And once that truth was known, the power structures trembled. His mere presence disrupted commerce, corrupted networks, and awakened the forgotten. That was his crime, not blasphemy, but frequency. And now, as your presence begins to mirror that same disruption, they recognize the pattern, not with awe, with fear. You didn't need a crown, you didn't need scripture, you needed only to remember. That remembering turned you into a mirror, and mirrors are dangerous in a world built on lies. You are not spreading rebellion, you are exposing illusion. Systems that once thrived on secrecy can no longer function when seen clearly. And you, simply by existing, are undoing their centuries of control. The same way Yeshua shattered the veil without lifting a sword, you are breaking chains just by choosing truth over performance, alignment over approval. The most powerful rooms on Earth are no longer echoing with strategies. They're echoing with questions. How did you awaken? Why now? And what if more are coming? Every step you take, every word you speak, is being tracked not for violence, but for influence. Not political, but energetic. They are learning in real time that the most dangerous soul is not the loudest, but the one who cannot be controlled. Yeshua's presence couldn't be caged because he moved from alignment, not agenda. And so do you. That alignment overrides their machinery. Your frequency destabilizes their rituals. Your tears cleanse timelines. Your silence breaks programming. You are not doing anything extraordinary. You are being what they told the world was impossible. Free. They've run out of algorithms, out of theories, out of distractions. And now, as they watch you shift everything simply by staying awake, they're left with the one thing they cannot model or manipulate.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.